Hello, everybody, and welcome to Queer Perspectives from We Create Space. You might have noticed I'm not Michael, who was supposed to be doing the intro, but Michael's having some microphone issues, so I'm going to be reading on his behalf. Michael is the founder of We Create Space. I will be doing this in my best Radio 4 voice, so you can all enjoy pretending that I am actually Michael, whose voice I cannot imitate. Good morning, or afternoon, or evening. I hope you're all doing okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We Create Space is a global collective of LGBTQ plus changemakers empowering our communities and allies with tools, knowledge, and support as a network for self-care, personal growth, and queer leadership. As a non-profit social enterprise, we're on a mission to drive positive change for LGBTQ plus people across global industries, cultures, and societies. Queer Perspectives is a webinar series empowering communities through conversation. Today, our live panel discussion will be with 4 queer disabled leaders who will be sharing their inspiring stories and unique lived experience through the lens of their different intersecting identities. Be prepared to gain some insight and perspective, as well as some practical advice around creating inclusive cultures in the workplace. On that note, I will pass over to our wonderful host, Marchewicz Rivera. Rivera, please tell me how you pronounce your surname, who's going to be facilitating today's session. Oh, yeah.
Max, that was perfect. You said it perfectly the first time. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Marchewicz Rivera. I am wearing a black dress with a black rim hat. I have makeup on. I'm a femme-presenting, light-skinned, queer, disabled Latinx person from the United States. I'm zooming in from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm really excited to be moderating today's conversation. And that's my visual description for everyone who's wondering. And we're going to get started because we lost some time, so we want to get started and jump right into discussion. I'm going to introduce the panelists. And before we do that, I want to encourage everyone to network while you're here, right? So dropping in the chat where you're coming in from, where you're zooming in from. Feel free to drop your LinkedIn link. So I want to encourage everyone to network and build community that way. So if you take a few seconds to just drop your LinkedIn links in the chat, tell us where you're zooming in from. In this webinar, we have a global audience. So I'm really excited to have that. So while I am introducing the panelists, feel free to do that. And welcome. And thank you, Michael, for creating this space for all of us to exist and thrive together. So I have the pronunciation of the last names, so I'm gonna do my best to not butcher it. Stuart Olkal-Ahan is the founder and chief exec of Live Do This, the UK's only LGBTIQ plus cancer charity. They are autistic and have chronic myeloid leukemia, an incurable form of blood cancer. They identify as non-binary and queer, and they're passionate about queer liberation through community action. Welcome, Stuart. Hi.
Hi.
Hey. Next, we have Shar Bailey, who is a peak performance practitioner, host, and coach. She specializes in creating safe spaces for individuals to grow. Hey, Shar.
Hey, Mark. Hi, everyone. Good to see you again.
And then our third panelist, Max Mokovich. I hope I said that right. Almost. Is a BSL interpreter based in Nottingham. They also provide access consultancy, training, sound description, captioning, and audio description. As a queer, disabled, and autistic person, they are passionate about community work around intersecting identities. They are the founder of a community organization for queer disabled people and are on the board of a local trans peer support network, as well as being on the board of Milk Presents, a queer, internationally acclaimed theater company. Hello, panelists. How are y'all doing?
Hi, good, thanks.
Awesome. That's great. So we have some people here. We have people from London. No surprises there. Hi, Hugh. We have Tatum, also based in London. Hello. Boston. Woo, woo. That's awesome. Yeah, so we have France. We have France in the house. That's awesome. Welcome. Manchester, UK. Welcome. London. That's awesome. So welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're here. So glad you can join us. So we're going to jump right into the first question. And each panelist is going to, if they choose to answer the question, they're more than welcome to. The first question is, how do you define empathy in the workplace? And how has empathy informed your leadership approach as a chief executive officer? Who would like to kick us off? how has being, how do you define empathy, and how has it informed your leadership approach?
Hey, I think I'm going to head in there with empathy because, according to my little sister, I'm the queen of empathy, although she is only 16 and has a limited view on the world, so I'll take it. Um, but I think for me, when it comes to empathy at work, it's this old idea of listening to understand and not just respond. Empathy is about that layer deeper that we go. And it's also about recognizing that although I may not have walked in your shoes or have an understanding of the same thing that you are going through, I have an understanding of what it's like to be a human being. I know what oppression feels like. I know what rejection feels like. I know what hurt feels like. I know what pain feels like. And I can recognize as though, although I may not be suffering in the same way that you are, I have suffered and I can relate to how you might feel. So I think for me, empathy at work is getting away from avoiding things and throwing pity parties or avoiding people who have problems, and actually understanding and recognizing that I may not understand, but I can relate to that. And I want to engage in sharing and exploring how we can overcome that problem with you.
I would,
I think Max agrees.
Can I go? Yeah. No, totally. I want to first do a quick visual description of me. I'm a white, non-binary person. I have bright blue hair, which is short on one side and chin length on the other. It's a very queer haircut. Thanks, lockdown. I have a black beard. I'm wearing makeup and a shirt and a t-shirt with a glittery skull that you can't really see, but I'm keeping up my tradition of accidentally wearing something with a skeleton on it to every We Create Space event. I have a massive Progress Pride flag behind me, and my walker is next to me. I also have the biggest trans earring that I own, which goes all the way down to my shoulders, just a big trans symbol, which is black with a pentagram in the middle. On the topic of empathy, I am a big believer in what I like to describe as radical empathy. If someone is behaving in a way that is hurtful or ignorant or just in some way problematic, before assuming the worst, I always think it's useful to think, well, what's making that person say that thing? Is it actually coming from a place of hatred? Is it actually coming from a place of misunderstanding? Are they just having a really bad day and they're taking it out on you? And that's not okay, but at least you can understand that and it's a different thing. So I think, for me, I feel it's very important with regards to empathy to just try and think about where somebody's coming from before you respond to them. And that way you can hopefully do a lot of conflict resolution without the conflict even having to happen, because you've thought about where they're coming from and you can respond appropriately.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So Stuart speaking, I've got a black shirt over a black jumper. I'm against a soft pink wall, and I've got brown short hair and a stubbly beard, and I'm covered in tattoos. So I agree. And I heard once on a different sort of panel, they were talking about the difference between resisting the urge to call people out and instead calling people in. So calling in with them and checking in and just seeing where things are coming from, trying to empathize. And then also understanding that sometimes you have your limits. And sometimes when you don't have the energy to commit that all the time, then you can call on people. So calling on people to be better. So again, not engaging with them in a hostile way, but making sure that they understand that they have a duty to better their understanding with that. And when I think about empathy, I think about it in regards to the people I work with and trying to, especially in the pandemic, and understanding everyone's got such a strain going on in their lives and appreciating we have a lot of volunteers. So it's always based on their capacity and what they can bring to us as well. But also I set my organization up to be led by lived experience. So empathy is at its core. So I'm able to empathize with my work staff, but also the beneficiaries, and making sure that we can all come together. And I really push for, as much as possible in my organization, horizontal power structures and discussions. So rather than hierarchies where somebody's above someone, you can't discuss things, I always make time for, especially in the digital age, where you can do the work, but then you can still socialize and connect and create those horizontal moments so that you can really good, communication, openness, and make sure that you can get to the real deep stuff sometimes people are hiding.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Really great perspectives there. So thank you for bringing that to the forefront. We're going to dive into question number 2. Again, talking about intersectional identities and perspectives to the forefront. I know we all exist at the intersections of multiple identities. How has your disability informed the way you lead, work, and move through this world? And I'm going to shoot it over to, well, I don't know who to call on first. So I'm just going to say whoever wants to volunteer. I don't want told anyone.
I'm happy to go again. So we're definitely the one thinking about leading it, because I'm the chief exec and the founder. So I have to kind of pull everything together, and it gets a lot. But I think definitely being a disabled person. So my cancer gives me a bunch of sort of secondary factors that have happened since. And because I've acquired that, quite recently in the last 3 to 4 years, it's been a real sort of shift in the way my life has changed. So previously I had all the energy in the world and I would do so many things at once. And now I have that urge still, but I have to really be careful about my limitations in regards to my physical disabilities in movement and getting around. Like I can't be running all over London doing meetings. It's not physically viable for me. And then also my chronic fatigue. I have to make sure that I'm being really careful about that so I don't overexert myself. And then I also have to be careful with my autism to make sure that I'm not putting in too many meetings in a day, that I just burn myself out, because that's very easy for me as well. So it's a lot of that, but it's also then, I think, coming back to the idea of empathy, making sure people around me can empathize with me as well. So being open and honest about those things and making sure that people understand where I'm coming from, why things come across. And also with the autism, sometimes I'm really bad with online stuff and I can cut people off without realizing, and just checking in and just reminding people, being like, this is a bit awkward for me. And I hope that's all right.
Should I would like to go next, or Max, whoever?
I can chime in. I think because I'm a freelancer and I do a whole bunch of different stuff, there are lots of similarities and lots of differences between the way that Stuart works and the way that I work, because it's just me that I'm responsible for. But I'm going into lots of different workplaces and having to navigate being a disabled person, being an autistic person, being a person with mental health needs in all of those sectors. I have a physical disability, and that has progressed throughout my 20s and into my 30s. So I've had quite a lot of different experiences of how people interact with me. When I had an invisible disability, when I started using a walking stick, and now as a wheelchair user, 3 very different experiences, all equally difficult and challenging, just in different ways. And yeah, it has very much changed the way in which I interact with people. But I think the most important thing was learning to self-advocate in a setting where, especially as an interpreter, I'm kind of seen as an add-on extra. I'm not part of the conversation. I'm not there to be myself. I'm there to facilitate communication between other people. So being able to stand up for yourself is a funny thing for a wheelchair user to say. Not that I'm a full-time wheelchair user, but yeah, to be able to stand up for yourself and say, actually, I need to do this, or I need this to work this way. Or as an autistic person, that is actually quite difficult for me. And having those conversations is really difficult. They're even just within my profession and talking to other interpreters, since that's my main world of work, there is still quite a lot of shame around being disabled. And quite often, because I'm visibly disabled, my coworkers will disclose the fact that they also have a disability that might be hidden, or they might be neurodiverse, or they might have stuff with a mental health condition, and anything at all. But quite a lot of people disclose those things to me, and also tell me that they never tell anybody else, because there is still this culture that people are worried that if you say, well, actually, I have mild hearing loss, and if someone asks a question from the back of the room, I'm not going to hear it. There's 2 of us here. As my coworker, would you mind interpreting any questions that come in from the back of the room? But I know that if it wasn't me in that job, they might not have said that to their coworker, and they might just have had to deal with it in a different way. And I think it's become kind of I'm beating the drum on behalf of visibility for queer people in the interpreting profession, but also just it should be okay for people who work within the world of access to say that we have our own access needs. It seems very obvious, but it really isn't the norm. So I do push for that.
So I think, was the question, how has my disability informed my work? Yeah. So I think
Yes.
being autistic, it's difficult to say how my disability informs my work, because my work is about who I am. So who I am is a disabled Black lesbian. And, before I'm a disabled person, I'm a Black person, and that informs my work much more than my disability does, because I can hide. My disability is hidden, but my Black skin is on my face 24/7. But I think what I would like to say in regards to how my disability informs the work that I do, it adds benefit and value to the work that I do. I find that being an autistic person and being a coach, it helps me observe, it helps me cut through the I would say, neurotypical nuances and of, you know, behaviors that people feel like they have to do. And it really helps me get down to this is to avoid the cliche of being black and white. I am that black and white autistic person who can cut through the rubbish that we say, the emotions and the extra things that people like to add on just for a bit of flavor. And, you know, I can say things like, we don't get extra points for complaining longer, and allow people to get straight to the point and to cut through some of the things that the world gives them as extra problems. I think my autism and my neurodiversity really helped me not live in the neurotypical world of all of these rules and regulations, and just really helps me to get down to the nitty gritty and actually get the job done a lot of the time. So as much as previously it inhibited me in terms of socializing and being confident and networking, perhaps in the actual work that I do, it's 100% a shield and a sword and everything that I need to do my job.
If I could quickly, just very similarly, I had just a very brief moment where I went, but my job is about understanding what people are saying and what they really mean, and what do they really mean by what they say. And by definition, me being an autistic person means that's the thing I struggle with. And that lasted all of like this long. And then I went, no, I've been practicing and learning how to do that. And I've honed that skill in a way that other people who naturally have maybe have some ability in that area haven't been thinking about it. I've been actively trying to do that and going, okay, so you're saying this, but you really mean this, and it's because of these social rules that nobody ever talks about, but we all know they're there, that you're saying it this way. So that actually it works really, really well for translation work, because you go, well, what do you mean by that? Oh, I got it. Yeah, I'm on it. So yeah, absolutely, it's a superpower in that way. Sometimes it really is.
Thank you all so much for sharing. I do want to disclose that I myself have a physical disability as well as mental health conditions, bipolar and depression. So I really appreciate the candor in which you are speaking about your neurodiversity, autism. That's not something I have experience with. So I really appreciate the insight and the vulnerability in sharing your experiences, right? Because we don't live in a world that is truly accessible to all of us. Like I mean, and we'll talk about that a little bit later and going back to work and pre-pandemic life. But what advice would you give to other disabled folks who don't think they can become leaders? I know there's so much, you know, they say without representation, you can't believe it possible. And so what advice do you give to other people who are listening, who are disabled, who are interested, like, can I be a leader?
So I want to jump straight on that, because I really dislike that phrase. And I know everyone loves it, but you can't be what you can't see. And I don't think that's true. Just because no one's done it yet doesn't mean you can't be the one. And I think that's also sometimes as well, this and you know, visibility and representation is incredibly important. So it definitely encourages more people to follow suit, but you can open that door first. And I think also sometimes there are people out there doing it, but society doesn't celebrate people like ourselves very often. So sometimes we can't see other people, but it doesn't mean there aren't other people out there. And when you start on that path, you'll probably connect more. And that's what I found. So being a queer disabled leader, I mean, before all this, I was a tattooer, and that world is very different. And it's, you know, it's very superficial and it's very aggressive and it's quite intense. And, you know, I got on with that in my own way. But even in that space, I was creating queer spaces, and we created an international queer network of tattooers that has just grown. And so I think there's warmth you can bring into every space. But when you think then about setting up your own thing from scratch, which is what I did with the charity, it was quite an odd thing moving into an area that is quite formulaic. There's quite a lot of legal precedent of how things have to work. And then came the other aspect of, can I do this? So especially when this is the first thing that I've done since acquiring my physical disabilities, is this, you know, is this really the right way to test my limitations? And then I realized the limitations are mine to set. You know, just because that, you know, as long as you hit obviously the legal structures or whatever you're doing, the rest of it's up to you, and you get to set what works for you, what doesn't, how the organization works around you. If you need to work half-time, part-time or whatever, that's fine. Build a network around you that helps you meet your goals, and realize you don't have to do everything yourself. And that doesn't mean you have to then, if you, for example, want to be the leader, doesn't mean you have to step aside because you can't be the person doing it all the time. You may be more productive in those smaller pockets of time. So it's figuring out what works for you and not apologizing for it. I think when you're a disabled person, it's so easy to make allowances or apologize. But if you just declare what's your norm, I think that's much healthier, and it's much more powerful to tell people, I'm not available at this time. This is my cutoff point. This is my self-care moment. You know, sort of structure your well-being into your workspace.
I really agree with everything that Stuart said. I'm literally just looking at you, Stuart, and just starting nodding. And they're really obviously giving a lot of knowledge. So thank you for your knowledge. But I completely agree. I think as a leader, as a queer person, there is this notion of you can't be what you can't see. And I think, like Stuart was saying, visibility is key, it is important, it is imperative. But at the same time, if you're thinking about becoming a leader, you're a leader. If you look at the world, if you look at the problems in the world and think, why doesn't someone do something about this? You are someone. And I think, just as I would say to somebody who hasn't got a disability, rather than focusing on why can't I, focus on how can I? Because we are taught by the world, especially as queer people, we're constantly being told about all the limitations, all of the things we can't do. And it's really easy to get into oh, well, there are all of these reasons of why I can't. But if we can own our individuality, own our queerness, own our disability, and say, well, actually, there are all of these reasons why I can't, but how can I? What could I do? And start there and tap into our amazing networks and the community that we've got, then anything is possible. And I think We Create Space is testament to that in itself, because the community here is full of people who have created something because they have decided that it's needed and they're doing it. So I think, be part of a community, ask yourself a quality question, and remember that you are someone just as much as you're putting value on the people outside of you. Put some of that value back onto yourself.
I have very little to add. You've both very comprehensively answered the question. Yeah, the only thing that I would say is, if you have some voice telling you, but you can't do that because you have this disability, you have this mental health condition, you are neurodiverse in this way, because whatever. If you have that little voice, just stop and take a step back and think, why do I think that? Because a lot of that is just learned, internalized ableism, because we are taught so often that we can't do things, or being an autistic person means you can't do this, being a wheelchair user means you can't do that, whatever it may be. But why? Because actually, somebody who was not disabled in the same way you are thought that you couldn't do it and thought that you weren't capable, and that's why you've been told your whole life, or that's why you've internalized this feeling that you can't. So it's really worth analyzing those feelings, and that sometimes really helps you to get past them, because you think, well, actually why not? That's not based on anything, it's just the messages that I've kind of absorbed over the years. So yeah, you do you. Challenge those internalized ableism voices that come bubbling up, or those internalized queerphobic, like, why can't I wear a dress to work if people will perceive me as a person who shouldn't be wearing a dress in a professional environment? Why? Challenge it, and then be brave when you can.
Yeah, and I want to follow on from that, because I definitely think there is that point where sometimes we sort of internalize this idea of productivity a bit too much, and we sort of take it into this aspect of, if I'm not productive, then I'm not successful, and all of these kind of things. And I should point out as well, when I was saying about, you can be the first person to do it, I should mention that the charity I run, Live Through This, is the first of its kind. So it is possible, you can do those things. And same kind of thing that Max was just talking about as well, that idea of that internalized ableism of like, well, can I do it? And then the people around you. And then, even when I think about going for bids, and I'm writing bids of like large amounts of money, and I'm like, what if they find out that I'm, I've got cancer, and, all these things. And then I think, who cares? Like, the work works. I do enough metrics to prove that it works. The output's great. We're having an impact. All of that extra stuff is just your ego trying to get in the way and just make things complicated. And I've got OCD, so that like really likes to do that. So sometimes, sometimes you just have to realize, do you know what? The proof is in the pudding. I can do the work. The output's there. Like, the rest of it is just my personal ego that I have to work on. And that's a personal thing. It's not a work thing. So it's good just to pull that apart and realize that, you can do it.
And it's fine if you fail. That's also okay. It's if you want to do it, go for it. Like the fear of failure is a huge stopping point for people. But you know, people fail at stuff all the time, and especially if it's a fear of failure because you represent a specific community. Do your best, do your very best to ignore that voice, because it's so overpowering. It's so difficult when you feel like, oh, if I fail at this, I will have failed as a queer disabled person, or as a queer person, as whatever. Try and ignore that as much as you can, because it's nonsense. And if anybody thinks that, their opinion is not worth your time. So really just try and power through. And I say that as a person who is riddled with anxieties about stuff. But yeah, it's really useful to try and remind yourself of why you're thinking that and who are you thinking that for. And if you mess up, if you make a mistake, if you do it really badly, if it goes horribly wrong, okay, that's fine.
Yeah, and then sorry, Mark, we'll come back to you in 1 minute. But another thing to add for that, normally what happens as well is the people around you that put that pressure on you. And I think Max is right with that. So especially when you identify yourself as disabled, as queer, or some other identifier, then people look to you to answer for a whole community and represent a whole community. And then that can really seep into your head about, am I being authentic? And what is authenticity? And I think in an age where authenticity can be quite performative online as well, you can really get caught up in like, what should I be showing people? And the reality is the best way you can do it is just by being yourself, being centered in yourself, and realizing the only person you represent is your experience, and your experience touches on multiple others, but you're not representing a whole group if you don't have to. You're just representing your own progress.
Yeah, and I mean, just kind of wrap up this portion or this segment. You know, I think it's so important that you are really touched about, you know, what I think for really, what does your own definition mean, right? Your own definition of a leader, your own definition of success, your own definition of possibility, of like what you can accomplish. Because I think so often in capitalism, especially, we are forced to see our value based on our productivity, based on the profit we bring in, based on how much wealth we accumulate. And we know that that doesn't always equal real impact, right? So I really appreciate, excuse me, what you all shared. I want to pivot for a second because we're still in the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that this pandemic has really opened up a new way of being, but there's so much resistance to change that we want to get back to a pre-pandemic life or an ableist view of normal. So we saw workplaces adapt and shift and meet the needs of the moment. Now, as things prepare to go back to an ableist view of normal, what should workplaces do in order to ensure that disabled people aren't left behind? Max?
There are so many things that disabled people across the board in all sorts of different areas and sectors and in work and in education and other kind of scenarios. Disabled people have been saying, please can you adapt in XYZ ways, because that's what I need to meet my access needs. And they consistently have been told, no, we can't do it. I'm afraid you can't work from home 2 days a week. You can't have flexible hours because you have childcare. You can't do this, you can't do that. COVID-19 hit and suddenly everybody was affected. And magically, all of those things were possible. And yes, it was complicated. And yes, it took a while to get used to. But suddenly we could do it. So my biggest thing is, if you are a person who has really benefited from having a slightly different way of working, or if you know a colleague who has really benefited from us having a different work schedule, or being able to do emails at 4 a.m. instead of 9 to 5 because their sleep pattern is odd, you know, why not? What is the actual reason for having to do your work that way? So if you know somebody whose employer, or if your own employer is telling you that you need to go back to the very strict, very formal way of working, please challenge them and tell them, well, if we could do it through COVID and it worked fine, and I was better off in my own health or well-being or work-life balance or any possible reason, if it's better for me to work that way. I was no less productive, you know that, because we've been doing it throughout the pandemic. It's really important that we advocate for keeping those things, and also for any incoming staff members. So if you are somebody who is in charge of hiring new people to join your organization, keep in mind, how did we work during the pandemic? And actually, if this person maybe says, well, actually, I really need to work part-time, I need to job share, I need to work from home, or I need flexible hours, or I need a different format of working, or I need to make sure I've got support workers in place. Some of that obviously is a legal responsibility. I would argue all of it is your legal responsibility, but just be more aware that there are so many more accommodations you can make to to not only allow people to just about be able to work and survive, but to thrive in the workplace and to be their best selves and to do the most that they can do and contribute the best they can, and really get rid of this idea that, you know, office jobs are the norm and that a 9 to 5 job with additional meetings and with weekends and evenings. And if we could just knock that on the head and have everybody be able to articulate what they want and give people that opportunity, and just listen to people's needs and accommodate everyone as best you can. Because the last thing we want is to go back to a world where disabled people go, can I work from home on a Monday? No, we don't want to roll backwards.
Yeah, I massively support everything you said there. And like, you know, the whole point is reasonable adjustments, right? So what's unreasonable about doing digital meetings? And, you know, and especially, you know, myself not being able to run around the city, and because we don't have an office as a charity, we end up having to go to other people, and people before the pandemic would expect me to go all the way across London for half an hour at their GP surgery to then come all the way back. That's unreasonable. That's crazy. And it wastes so much of my day doing it as well as the fatigue point. And then it also goes back to what you're saying about capitalism, in the sense of this is what blocks us from being able to have what's seen as gainful employment, because they put these arbitrary constraints on it of 9 to 5, and you have to be in a physical space. But if we're able to be productive members of society in the ways that we need to be, then this is super important, because then this is also our access to fulfillment, money, stability, career progression, all of these factors. So I think this has shown more than any time that now you can be mixed methods in the way that you hold meetings, the way that you work, even just collaborative working, the way that we've all sort of gone into either video conferencing or dual editing documents. All of this stuff can be super fantastic. And then there's the other bit of, it's allowed us to connect nationally and internationally in a way like we never have before. I mean, even things like this, right? This would have been so difficult to do prior. And I think it's funny when I think about the pandemic and like in the past and moving forwards, because I think of it a little bit like when I was diagnosed with cancer, and simply in the sense that there is a grieving process where you have to let go of how the world was for you, and you have to come to terms with the way you're moving forwards. And it's natural, and we grieve things all the time. It doesn't have to be necessarily mortality. There's other aspects to your life you can grieve. And I think what we need to do is go through that period of that grieving, let go of that, because it was unhealthy. And there's lots of stuff around business and work capitalism that's very unhealthy. There's more to unpack. But this has been a small progress we've made. So it'd be great if we could continue moving forwards and make sure then that we don't effectively do like what Max was saying, open the door for people like ourselves during a time where everybody needed it, and then close the door once we're basically told, oh, we don't need you to be in this world anymore.
I think everything that they have both said is, I would 100% agree with. I think the only thing I would add is that we keep doing this work as we have done in lockdown on ourselves as individuals. I think people have been more open to working on themselves. They have looked at introspection, who they are, how they are, what their needs are. And I think now that we've got all of this information about ourselves, as we move forward, it's about honouring that, sticking to your boundaries, implementing your boundaries, being able to say, well, this is what works for me. These are the conditions under which I thrive. And, you know, even if you have to be a little bit forceful, saying, you know, with all of your chest that these are my needs, this is how I perform best, and standing up for ourselves. I think if we all do that collectively, then we should be moving in the right direction.
And you know, I think to a point of made earlier, is that during the pandemic, so many businesses thrived. You know, so unfortunately, some went under, but so many of the businesses thrived, and they realized actually you don't have to return to the office. You know, some companies are making their entire workforce remote because they saw that productivity was up. They saw that employees were happier. They didn't care about the office space or their free lunches. They cared about the flexibility. They cared about saving time on commuting. They cared about spending more time with family and friends and having that work-life balance. So we do see that there is a possibility, and that people can thrive in this new environment. And so I think that, you know, we have to really, for those who are in the workplace, HR departments, or who are CEOs, or really think about how you can get the best return on investment. Because you're hiring someone, disabled or not, you want your return on investment to come back to you. And if disabled people are not only capable of working, we do things well. I mean, like, we're badass people. And just because we need accommodations, or just because we need access needs, doesn't make our work value any less important. So I think that we need to think about how we move forward in a global society that allows connectivity and productivity and access to be universal, because it wasn't just disabled people who benefited from this work from home environment. It was mothers, it was single parents, it was people who have elderly care, who have to do elderly care. It was people who had to take long commutes to get to work. You know, so many people have benefited from this work from home environment. So I just want to mention that it wasn't just disabled people who benefited, but we all benefit when we have a universal design centered on wellness and accessibility. So just wanted to mention that. I want to get a perspective on what you hope to achieve or leave behind. You are our trailblazers. You are our amazing queer disabled leaders. So as queer disabled leaders, activists, change makers, what do you hope to achieve or leave behind?
I'll jump in. What I hope to achieve in so the work I do is quite unique in the fact that it's the first time the charity like this has existed, and it's an interesting thing because what happens is just by being queer in a space that wasn't previously even aware of people like ourselves, it really shakes things up. And this is a space that is very disability coded because we're thinking about cancer. So it's very interesting watching people realize things can be done differently. And I'm a big proponent of like queering systems and actually like getting to the sort of root of things and why can't we do it differently and why can't we have additional compassion and make people connect. For example, you know, as a rough example, cancer services are always very gendered. It's always very men, women, and that's it. And then the services we do are not based on that because that makes no sense. And what we do is we bring people together of all different tumor types, disabilities, ages, genders, and it just really pulls people together. And then the beautiful conversations that come from that. And so what I'd like to achieve is basically, I think everybody should lead by example. And by that, I mean by their own example. What feels genuine to them, what feels right, what feels impactful. And what you tend to find is the people around you, like a ripple effect, start to see that, and they see that authenticity and growth and how they might take that on. So I like being a visibly queer person in spaces that aren't typically so, and really shaking up their preconceived notions and making them bring a little bit more warmth into their lives. And then for what to leave behind, I think that one's a bit more complicated. I think what I would want to leave behind is my own internalized ableism. So, you know, especially pre-pandemic, there was a lot of pressure to do things, air quotes, normally, you know, do that 9 to 5, present in that way, work that way, be available all the time, be able to, you know, go out to these meetings and spaces when really, in my mind, I'm going there and I'm like, is there going to be an elevator? I don't know if I can actually physically get around the space. You know, there's all of these things. And then I have to pause, reflect, look at the structure I've built around myself, and then realize I have built a support structure that supports my health, my ability needs, and I built a community to do so, especially with people like yourselves, and really be centered in that.
When you said leave behind, Mark, I thought you meant like a legacy. That's the autism, isn't it? I just literally took a completely different meaning from you said exactly the same words, and my meaning was completely different.
You're probably right, to be fair.
It's probably legacy or
Yeah, it's we don't want to use the word legacy, but the idea of a legacy is what the question was getting at. But we were trying to avoid using that word. But yes, you're right.
So it's my autism, not yours this time.
High five, Stuart. It's all of our autism. We're into it. So I suppose I should explain that for anybody who isn't on the spectrum or might not understand what we mean. One of the symptoms, I suppose, or traits of autism is that sometimes we can take things very literally or have a completely different perspective. So when you said what's something that you would like to leave behind, Stuart, in their perspective, thought you meant get rid of or no longer carry forward with them, whereas I, with my perspective, thought that you meant as a legacy for others. So yeah, high five for that. But I think for me, in terms of legacy or something to leave behind, it is really all about a path where I believe in when we see people like us thrive, it reminds us that we can also thrive. When I see people like Maylis from We Create Space, who's an incredible, powerful Black lesbian woman, when I see her thrive, sorry, she's bisexual, but when I see her thrive, it makes me want to thrive. It reminds me of something that I have within myself. And I want to be able to give that feeling to other people who perhaps might be like me in some ways and maybe not like me in other ways. When I grew up, I really felt alien. I used to actually identify as alien. I didn't feel as though I belonged to any sort of group or community. So for me, it's about cultivating and creating spaces where people feel nurtured enough to unpack, to get rid of all of the labels and all of the preconceived ideas and suggestions that we have about ourselves, and be who we truly are. I really believe that when we support each other, when we connect each other, when we allow ourselves the space to rest and to just be, we can become, and we can become the truest, highest, most wonderful, queer, fantastical, rainbow, glittery, sparkling versions of ourselves. So I think for me, it's all about how can I be more of me and share and inspire and connect with people and help them to be more of themselves too. So I don't want anybody else to be like me, but I want everybody who I connect with to be more of them. So if I can do that with my interactions or the spaces that I create or just in my every living breath, then that's what I want to be able to do with my existence.
Very similar answer to both of you from me, I think. It's an interesting one for me because I now have a very visible physical disability because I use a wheelchair full time when I'm out of the house. I can no longer turn that off in a way that I previously could, or it would be intermittent that I would use a walking stick or a walker. And also my gender presentation is now very visibly non-conforming. Although when I use a wheelchair, people somehow lose the transness. And in case this amuses anybody, multiple passengers in my car have gone, people really stare at you when you're driving. Well, they can't see the wheelchair when I'm driving the car, so they can see that I'm trans when I'm driving in a way that they can't the rest of the time because I've got wheels. I brought my own chair. It's a scandal, I know. I brought my own seating. It's a big deal. I'm magically moving and sitting down at the same time. I realize blows people's minds. So yeah, I automatically challenge some people's perceptions, and it's a bit tricky. Sometimes I get endless amounts of the patronizing behavior. I've been patted so many times. Even in the few jobs I've had through the pandemic, which is only relatively recent because I've been shielding, people still want to pat me on the arm or pat me on the head. That's my personal favorite, which is sarcasm, because I'm a wheelchair user. And so people really talk down to me because apparently sitting down changes everything about who I am. So that's quite difficult to challenge in itself. But generally just existing, my visibleness, my being a wheelchair user, my being gender non-conforming visibly is a political act, whether I want it to be or not. That is how people perceive it. And what I would hope to achieve or to leave behind, I wasn't sure which meaning the question meant. I thought it could have been either. I'm on both of your sides. What I want to achieve is for people to see somebody like me and go, oh, I made XYZ assumption. Evidently, I was wrong about that. I think I also talk about the other aspects of my access needs and neurodiversity and things more now that I have a visible disability, because I'm like, you can't ignore the fact I'm autistic and that I have OCD. I'm also, just because I'm sitting down, that doesn't erase the rest of me. It's not all about the wheels. So yeah, I would like people to leave maybe questioning some negative or incorrect assumptions that they had, hopefully in a very positive way, and hopefully in a way that leads to positive change and that doesn't leave them feel like they did something wrong necessarily, even if they did. That's not helpful. The helpful thing is to go away and go, okay, so I actually assumed that person's PA was the person I was having the meeting with, even though I knew the person I was meeting with was called Max and that they were coming to do an access audit on my venue for a queer disabled charity. I have just realized after they emailed me that I directed every single question in that interaction to their PA, who was sat 3 rows of chairs behind them deliberately and did not make eye contact once, to make it really obvious that the person they were actually having the meeting with was me down here. I really hope that somebody in that organization, which I will not name, thought about that afterwards and thought, yeah, we made a mistake there. So next time they meet a disabled person, they won't, or if they do have that assumption, they'll then go, oh, hang on, I've been here before, I've had this experience, I made a wrong assumption and I acted incorrectly. With regards to queerness, I mean, I'm never going to be a person with a quote unquote binary gender expression. That's not who I am. The way I express my gender fluctuates wildly, and I love that. But yeah, I'm never going to fit into anybody's idea of what somebody is. Doesn't stop me being rampantly misgendered, but I really hope that helps me to kind of put those seeds out there for people to start thinking, even if obviously in an explicit training context, I want people to actively be thinking about it. But no matter what interaction I'm having professionally, I really want someone to come away from that and go, that person used they them pronouns and I didn't get that right, or I hadn't thought about that. I should do that moving forwards. So yeah, I hope to change some attitudes and maybe make people just have a little quiet word and a quiet reflect.
Thank you all so much. So to wrap up our webinar, I want to ask a question around introspection and care. How do you create space for introspection and care in life? So self-care, self-love, how do you manage it as a leader, as a change maker?
So for me, I'm not.
Can I go first? Because I'm terrible
Oh yeah,
at
of
this.
course you can. Yeah, jump straight in, go for it.
I'm really bad at looking after myself, so I feel like my wonderful co-panelists will be able to answer better. So I feel like I shouldn't have the last word on this one. It's really important to look after yourself, but I am really terrible at it. I'm bad at pacing myself and making sure that I've got time for, to actually say, well, what is within my capability and what actually is feasible for me. It's something I'm working on. I'll get there. I will let some much more competent people talk about this.
I mean, I was about to say exactly the same thing, so don't worry, you're not alone. So for me, I had to learn very quickly that restorative practice for me isn't what other people do. So other people go see friends and they hang out and they let off steam and whatever, and that doesn't work for me. And also what doesn't work for me is meditation or anything. My brain is constantly going. I've done a flotation tank and I had no serenity. It was just nonstop. So I realized what works for me is actually not sitting still, if that makes sense. So when I need a break, I go for a walk. Or if I'm feeling kind of lonely or tired, I get in a really warm bath, and then I might still just be staring at my phone or something, but it's a break from the normality. And this is why working from home is great. So if I'm feeling overwhelmed, it can be the middle of the day that I'm doing this thing, that I take an hour for myself to be like, okay, this is just a break from everything else. But there is one other thing that I think that I'm trying to do more of, which does help, and that is leaning into the community part. So sometimes, especially being a leader, you can feel like you're doing everything yourself, or you're the one doing everything for the first time. And sometimes that might be true. But one thing that's been really useful is, so the Outside Project are really good at connecting people here in London, and I love them dearly. And sometimes I'll go to some of our check-ins or just turn up at the centre and have a cup of tea, and I'll just be there sometimes with one other person, but it's a space that's different from mine. It's with other queer people. I can talk freely, and then I can just have those moments that pull me out of the normal things I'm thinking about work-wise all the time, and it gives me that restorative break.
Wow, no pressure then. So all on me. Here she says, life coach, well-being practitioner, Om Shanti. I agree with everything that Stuart and Max have said. I think they've hit the nail on the head. And I think the important thing there is that there is no one rule or one way for you to feel good. And there's nothing that a practitioner will tell you to do that's going to work for every single person. And I think for me, what really helps me stay aligned is being kind to myself and allowing myself to say, you can't make this meeting, and that's okay. And you have to avoid that person or this interaction, and that's okay. Or you've bitten off more than you can chew this month, and that's okay. And as well as being kind to myself and trying to limit myself and to comfort myself, it's also being kind to myself in the way of understanding that the world has limited me in some respects for some of my intersectionality. The world has told me that I'm not enough and made me feel smaller than I actually am. And it's ensuring that I don't reinforce those ideas that have been put upon me. So in that kindness to myself, it's also allowing myself to disregard or push away some of the expectations or the things that the world thinks of me, and just really letting myself be nice to myself, be comforted by myself, and do what I can, knowing that I don't actually have to do everything, and I probably couldn't even if I tried, and giving myself a little bit of a break. I think if you can do that, then have fun trying meditation, going for walks, baths, and all of those fun things. But for me, it always starts with that empathy that you said at the beginning, that empathy and that kindness and that compassion towards this little person, me. And I will just say, because I haven't said it yet, I am a mixed race woman in a cream shirt with big curly hair and a cream background as an audio description.
Wow, the time flew by so fast. I knew it would. First and foremost, thank you, Max. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Shar. This conversation has been so rich and so energizing for me. I'm like, oh, let's go, right? Let's queer, let's crip, let's change the workplace, let's change our cultures of what it means to be who we are. Thank you for creating space for us today, for being here, for sharing your expertise and your experiences. I want to thank Michael from We Create Space for creating this space for all of us to come together globally. I want to thank all of our attendees who came and made time to be here today. Thank you all so much. And I believe, Max, you have a closing out remark on behalf of Michael. Great.
This is not Michael, but it's Michael speaking. If Michael wants to turn his camera on and give you a wave and pretend that he's speaking, you can. Look, it's me. Hi, I'm Michael, the founder of We Create Space. I want to thank all of our panelists today and our wonderful host, Marchewicz Rivera. The next Queer Perspective conversation will take place on Thursday, the 9th of December, and will centre around the topic of coming out as HIV positive as a queer leader. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you, everyone. Be well, take care of yourselves, be gentle, be kind, be well.